Yes, thank you so much.
Welcome.
So, on behalf of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, we are pleased to present to you this panel on the politics of hate speech, implications for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. I will now hand over the floor to our moderator, Ms. Marites Vitug from Rappler, Philippines.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, may I introduce myself? I'm Marites Vitug. I'm a journalist from the Philippines. I will be your moderator for this panel entitled The Politics of Hate Speech, Implications for Democracy, Human Rights, and the Rule of Law. The speakers in this panel, organized by the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, or CALD, will seek to answer three questions. First, as politicians and political party leaders, what are their experiences with hate speech and how did they deal with them? Second, do their parties have specific measures to address hate speech and how effective are these? Third, as leaders with liberal and democratic values, how best to address the impact of hate speech on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. We have three eminent speakers, and I will introduce them in the order of their appearance. Abhisit Vejjajiva is former Prime Minister of Thailand. He was the leader of the Democrat Party and was chairman of CALD from 2016 to 2018. His political career spanned 2 decades, and during that time, he assumed many responsibilities, including being a member of parliament, a government spokesperson, and leader of the opposition in the House of Representatives for 3 terms. Francis Pangilinan, or Kiko, as we call him here in the Philippines, is a senator and currently chairperson of CALD and president of the Liberal Party. He is a leading opposition figure here in the Philippines. As president of the Liberal Party since 2016, he has been rebuilding it, changing its membership from mainly politicians to regular folk who want to contribute to nation building, and especially now in the time of the pandemic, to build a better normal. Our third and last speaker is Jayanthi Devi Balaguru. She chairs the CALD Women's Caucus and is also the president of the International Network of Liberal Women. She is a lawyer and a leading advocate in Malaysia of women empowerment. She has held prominent positions in her political party, PGRM, or Parti Gerakan Rakyat Malaysia. Jayanthi will be joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Each panelist will be given 15 minutes to speak, and we will start with Kun Abhisit, who is joining us from Bangkok, the seat of the conference. Kun Abhisit, the floor is yours. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay.
Well, thank you for allowing me to participate in this conference, in this webinar. I know there are 3 questions. 2 are really aimed at maybe sharing some direct experience. But I think the most important question is a third question. As a liberal, as a Democrat, what we do, what we can do to deal with this problem. So let me just say that I cannot overemphasize the importance of the need to deal with this problem of hate speech for at least 2 reasons. The first is that such speech is a clearly violation of people's rights. The people who are the target of such speeches obviously have their rights violated, and therefore they need to make sure that they have a way to be compensated or afforded justice. And at the same time, hate speech clearly reflects the lack of tolerance. And when you have a lack of tolerance, you cannot hope to have a diverse society coexisting and therefore be in a healthy democratic society. So that's why I think it's important to address this issue. Now, I'll just quickly go over the experience because like many other countries in the region, and also in fact in the world, where politics has become much, much more polarized in recent times. And in Thailand, obviously, over the last decade and a half, we've had a series of protests, demonstrations, and also political violence. So it shouldn't surprise you that pretty much all the players in politics have been the target of hate speech in some form or another. And with the growth of social media and the use of new platforms, such often misinformation and hatred can be spread very quickly throughout society. Now, if you ask how we, or I as a person, or we as a political party deal with this, I would first point out that it's almost always impractical to try to use the law. To file complaints, to wait for the process to play out, it's simply not going to be worth the time and the effort, and it will clearly not stop the spreading of such speeches or misinformation. Moreover, the existing laws that we have, whether it's defamation, whether it's the computer crimes law, are not, well, for me, not well written and not well suited to the task. I'll just give you an example. So for instance, if you discover hate speeches, misinformation on social media, and you are trying to file complaints, often you will find that the authorities don't get to the source of the misinformation and may in fact decide to prosecute the people who share such information. And those people who share don't necessarily have malicious intent. They may just be trying to inform people that such misinformation is present. So it's not really practical to use the law, at least existing laws. And frankly speaking, I cannot at the moment imagine what design of an appropriate law and process could deal with this. So we have to make do with, first of all, trying to explain if there's misinformation, try to get the truth out, and have a team that can monitor the kind of information that's floating around. Now, there is clearly a limit to how much you can do. And one of the most difficult things, and I think this is something that's worth pointing out, is as societies become more polarized, the use of social media will characterize bubbles, right? So people tend to look at information that basically confirms their beliefs. They tend to share information with like-minded people. So it's very, very difficult when you have misinformation that's being spread around, say, about you, to people who are mostly not your supporters anyway, for you to actually try to reach them. Because the information that you try to put out will often not be shared or spread about by the people who you want to address the misinformation in the first place. So there are clearly limitations. So having said that, let me move quickly to the third question, which is what I think about how we should deal with this whole problem. The first is, I think it's has to be recognized that hate speech is only a symptom of a deeper problem, which is one of racial, religious, sexual, or political bias and intolerance, which I've mentioned before. Now, some of the discriminations or the biases or prejudices, especially one on race, religion, and sexual discrimination, go back a long time and maybe ingrained in society. And there is no better way than to deal with those problems at the root, which means you need policies, you need measures that will address these problems in the first place. The hate speech is very much just the final symptom that reflects such biases. Now, the paper that is being circulated with the conference clearly suggests, and I agree, that now we need to expand that to include political bias, political hatred, misinformation and hate speech that's aimed at political opponents. Oftentimes, these hate speeches also are inciting, maybe because there is a tense situation, a standoff, protest, demonstrations. You know how emotions take over with these kinds of scenarios, and they can get out of hand. Now, if that's the case, my first point is you should try to address the problems of prejudices, biases, discrimination in the first place. Secondly, I think it's time that we have to be clear about the limits of freedom of speech or freedom of expression. Now, among certain people, they think that freedom of expression or freedom of speech is almost absolute. And I think that's clearly dangerous, because in exercising that freedom, and if you engage in things like hate speech, you are also violating other people's rights. So we need to be clear that we cannot say that such freedom can be absolute. And therefore, there has to be a line that can be drawn about the limits of using that freedom. I think, ironically, the traditional, if that's the correct word, of hate speeches, particularly on issues like race, religion, or sex, is probably easier to draw the line, because I think we can pretty much, there are clear norms and standards now being established at international levels and even at national levels about what would constitute a racial, sexual, or religious discrimination. The political differences is going to be a lot more difficult to try to define and to try to scope. Nevertheless, my point is we need to begin with some kind of definition and scope that would then classify such speeches as hate speeches. Now, once that's done, my suggestion is it's best if the people who are going to deal with this is going to be somebody who is politically neutral. Because I think even the previous panel, there's a question about what happens if these speeches actually come from the state. I read in the news today that Twitter closed almost 1,000 accounts here in Thailand, believed to be linked to the state in spreading, information positively about the government and negatively about its opponents. So you need a neutral body. Now that could be something that could be written into law, or it could be somehow a body that maybe comprises of media experts and maybe non-governmental organizations who I think all parties agree upon. So it needs to be an all-party effort to try to establish both the mechanism and the scope of what we would classify as hate speech. Now, if we're heading in that direction, I think the best enforcer, certainly in terms of social media, would be the owners of the platforms. At the moment, certainly in Thailand, the way these platforms work with governments does not really aim at tackling this issue. So at the moment, for instance, the Thai government would tell Facebook or Twitter to block accounts that spreading information that they deem to be a threat to national security. But that's not what we're trying to deal with. I think if we can scope what we think is hate speech, we have some kind of neutral body, and we try to ask for cooperation with the owners of the platform. That seems to me the most realistic way of moving ahead in dealing with this very, very important problem in a way that would not endanger the stifling of freedom of speech. Because when you allow either the state to come in as a player to enforce this, there is that threat or danger that the censorship would creep in. These are my initial thoughts. I cannot, again, overemphasize the urgent need to deal with this because, as I say, in many societies now and political systems now, things are becoming much, much more polarized. And the other thing that you need to recognize also is that in the world of social media, to grab attention, you tend to have to do something rather extreme or violent. And therefore, this will encourage people to be more extreme or more violent in order to get attention. So this problem is going to grow unless we do have a good framework of dealing with this very problem. So that would be my initial suggestions. And I think it's very important for us, liberals and Democrats, to try to come up with some kind of framework that could perhaps be established and used in any country, and maybe even get some international organizations also to agree on some kind of standards of how we deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kun Abhisit. So a law is out of the question, and let's hear from the Philippine experience from Senator Kiko Pangilinan.
Thank you, Marites. Good afternoon to everyone, or good evening, or wherever they may be. I'd like to say hello to Prime Minister Abhisit. How are you? When will we have dinner again after COVID? And to everyone else, a pleasant good afternoon. There were three questions that we were asked to answer. First, do you have experiences in recent times as a politician when you and or your political party were subjected to hate speech? And how did you deal with it? I've been subjected to hate speech since Facebook was created. I've been called many names. The verbal jabs have ranged from amusing, ridiculous, offensive, outrageous, nasty. Bashers, as many are probably familiar with, are unforgiving. They will notice everything about you, from your head to your toe, and find something to insult. They will not spare your family and friends. A number of times, my family has been at the receiving end. This includes my wife and my daughter. My daughter, who's been very vocal on social media, has faced online harassment and rape threats for speaking out and speaking her mind, including against rape culture. In 2018, together with the other powerful propaganda tool, fake news, the Liberal Party of the Philippines has been repeatedly accused of conspiring with the Communist Party of the Philippines to overthrow President Duterte in a poorly named Red October ouster plot. During the election season last year, together with the two Catholic priests and an opposition senator, Vice President Leni Robredo, Liberal Party chairperson, faced sedition charges over videos that linked President Duterte and members of his family to the drug trade. In the last election, a University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication research paper identified the two most trolled candidates in the Senate elections of May 2019. And they were candidates of the Liberal Party, Senators Mar Rojas and Senator Bam Aquino. Both failed to make it to the top 12 and get re-elected. We have, in these many instances involving the party, we have raised the issues with the Secretary of Justice and the Secretary of National Defense, as well as the Armed Forces of the Philippines Chief of Staff during budget debates in the Senate. And repeatedly, they have denied our involvement in any of these alleged ouster plots. And the Department of Justice itself had dismissed cases that were filed against Vice President Leni Robredo. Part of the realization of those experiences is that while our response was able to officially clarify the matter, the vice president and the political party we lead, the stain is already there. And that has been the target of democracy's enemy, to stain the image of critics, of opposition forces, of dissent, so badly as to render critics or opposition figures irrelevant. Demonization, insults, fake news. For insults to myself and my family, we have learned to take them in stride as par for the course, as politician and public figure. My personal rules for dealing with hate speech: simply block and delete, obviously paid trolls. And if you have to deal with them, behave online as you would offline. Recognize that the people behind these fake accounts mostly are paid trolls or influenced largely by paid trolls. Do you or your political parties adopt specific measures in order to address hate speech? How effective were these measures, and are there other solutions or remedies you think could have been implemented to curb hate speech? Well, we suffered the plague of hate speech and fake news. Hate speech has been used many times before, particularly to rationalize wars or genocide. It has been used to make others of people of different race, religion, gender, health condition, and yes, socioeconomic class. In the Philippines, hate speech seems to have found legitimacy with no less than the President of the Philippines as the font, delivering them like a natural part of his public vocabulary. Lies and invectives have been typical expressions rather than exceptions. I have been repeatedly insulted publicly in the last 4 years by no less than the President, even challenging me to a fist fight. And echoed by the powerful, hate speech can be weaponized against the subject of the remarks. It can incite violence and chaos. Mouthed by government officials, these utterances could be and have been interpreted as official policies. The 3-year incarceration of Liberal Party Senator Laila de Lima has started as misogyny, a particularly spiteful kind of hate speech. In his many speeches, the President has repeatedly threatened to kill drug lords, drug pushers, and drug users. He has ordered police forces to kill anyone they believe are involved in the illegal drug trade. The result, since the President launched his anti-drug crackdown in 2016, tens of thousands killed. While the official tally is 800 drug-related killings, human rights groups put the number closer to over 30,000. Even as the Philippine National Police changes the numbers in its accomplishment report, in 2017, it classified over 16,000 homicide cases as under investigation in relation to its anti-narcotics operation from July 1, 2016 to September 30, 2017. What is particular to this time now is that social media has become the main avenue by which hate speech and fake news are spread. It has been said, with social media technology and digital technology comes speed, scope, and scale. It's sad that, and I quote, "a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes." Now a lie can travel at the speed of thought around the world and brainwash tens of millions along the way. Backed by a well-oiled machinery of paid social media users, the lie can come off as truth. And the third question: what specific areas of intervention should liberal and democratic leaders focus on to address the impact of hate speech on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law? This is a sticky question. Traditional media and social media will play key roles in ensuring that reporting will not focus on the hate, but on underlying issues that engender it, like poverty, inequality, and discrimination. Rather than simply centering on juicy sound bites, reportage that puts the correct context on issues is a victory against destructive spins or narratives. Let us continue to create safe spaces online and offline, especially given the limitations of the pandemic, for free, honest, and critical conversations, listening sincerely, and sharing intently. Let us continue to engage social media users politely by pointing out facts from opinion, sharing not only proof, but also mindset of openness and tolerance. We must encourage victims and witnesses to report hate speech-related crimes. Hate speech remains a largely invisible entity because many victims do not report the cases or do not even understand that they are victims of hate speech. When we counter hate speech, we are not only protecting the civil peace, we are also protecting our dignity and rights as a people. Hate speech may be a sharp weapon, but overuse can blunt its edge. We can counter hate messages with our collective vigilance and by standing for truth. Later on, we can probably discuss during the open forum and discussion some of the thoughts in terms of how do we come together as a community to provide precisely parameters within which we can regulate or we can put a check on hate speech. In the end, ultimately, it's a concerted effort of the community to put hate speech in its place by a common effort and common effort to address this by the community stakeholders themselves, the media, non-government organizations, public leaders, private sector leadership, the owners of these social media platforms should all come together and hopefully move towards a common direction to address and put a check on hate speech. Thank you and good afternoon, good day to everyone.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan. We look forward to a discussion later, and we will have Jayanthi from Malaysia, who will speak about her experiences and what Malaysia is doing to counter hate speech. Hi, Jayanthi, are you here? Anyway, while waiting for Jayanthi, I think I can't see her now. While waiting for Jayanthi, there were Senator Pangilinan and Kun Abhisit shared one common thought, that is to go to the underlying roots of hate speech. As Senator Pangilinan said, this poverty, inequity, discrimination, and as Kun Abhisit said, similarly, it's only a symptom of deeper problems. So I think Jayanthi is with us now. Jayanthi, hello.
Hi, Marites, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but
you can't see me.
Is there a problem with your video? You can maybe just go on speaking.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I will. Hi, Senator.
Hello. Good.
Is Kun Abhisit with us?
Yes, he's here.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Okay. If I could just go ahead with my presentation.
Yes, please.
Okay.
It's okay, we can hear you well.
Thanks. Thank you so much. As far as my presentation is concerned, I'm going to actually take the Malaysian concept or the Malaysian aspect. Hate speech in Malaysia is one of the many indicators of inequality, not only in the country, but actually in the society itself. As everyone is aware, Malaysia is of diverse race and religion. We seem to always border on hate speech, on religion, on race. The poor and marginalized are often oppressed and are backed even further into a corner with no resources and no one to turn to for any kind of aid. But nothing spells out this inequality more clearly than the realization that all of the violence and discrimination comes from a lack of understanding and acceptance, which then turns to the complete rejection of what makes people who they are. What makes hate speech so rampant in Malaysia is that in a way promoted and being made use of by the leaders themselves. In fact, it is not only something that they make use of, but something that they have successfully institutionalized as well by means of imposing broad laws which in turn can be used as laws that suppress the freedoms of people. When crime turns into law is when people can truly confirm that there is something wrong with the system. Many people have found that one way to address hate speech is via representation, through making use of a collective voice big enough that it cannot simply be ignored by the general public. With this, some minority group leaders have risen into power with the hopes that they can finally effect significant change into the system, which breeds inequality and persecution of people who belong to certain groups. However, as it turns out, not even political leaders are safe from hate speech and discrimination, as demonstrated by many government officials and leaders in Malaysia, who despite their positions and the influence that comes with them, continue to suffer and fear for their lives for things that they can't always control. As everyone knows in Malaysia, we have Malaysia Kini, which is a very free and firm reporting media agency. And as I go on, you will realize that there has been hate speech targeted at so many people that sometimes you just wonder where it's going to lead this to. In this document, there are several articles containing instances and cases of hate speech. And hate speech on the basis of one's ethnicity, especially when it belongs to a certain group with common nationals or cultures or traditions. Gender traditionally refers to either of the two sexes. In modern times, refers to gender identity. Religion, a person's belief. In Malaysia, we have the Islam faith, which is the religion for the Malays. We have the Chinese, we have the Hindus as well. We have the Christians, and we have other ethnicities as well, Catholics and thereon. Even in my own experience as a Hindu woman, I have actually been a target as well for hate speech. In many instances, when I go down for campaigning or when I'm actually sort of challenging for a cause, like one of my experiences was when I was working very hard with a group of women, Hindu women, to get housing for them in a very small marginalized village of long houses. And when we were working very hard and we managed to overcome the first hurdle, I was subject to the first experience of hate speech when one very leading politician made a statement in a very public arena saying that a chicken, a hen, doesn't lay an egg and start preening if the hen did not have a cockerel to mate. And it became such an insult, and everyone started going around trying to say "Kokoroko, kokoroko" around me. Can you imagine wherever they went? Because everyone knew it was targeted at me. And my political party knew of it, but my political party didn't know what to do, didn't know how to address it, didn't know how to actually bail me out maybe, or stand by me, or they rather thought that, you know, it is something to do with minority groups, maybe it was something to do with ethnic minority. They decided to just look the other way. So I guess that's one thing that we all must be aware of, in the sense that how many of us, how many local leaders, or how many political leaders, how many NGOs, how many civil rights groups will look the other way, or will we continue our fight to ensure we can actually do something to start at least eliminating these forms of discrimination in its own way. In Malaysia, we also had another incident, which is an LGBT activist, Newman Afi. He accused the authorities of intimidation in April 2019. He was allegedly questioned by police officials in Kuala Lumpur for over an hour following a trip to Geneva to read a statement from a coalition of various LGBT groups to the United Nations Human Rights Council for its Universal Periodic Review of Malaysia. Afifi states that it was typical of the police to harass human rights defenders under the orders of the authorities in an attempt to silence minority groups such as the LGBT community. In the statement he read to the UNHRC, Afifi complimented the Malaysian government for supporting recommendations for combating bullying in schools, but expressed his dismay in the lack of discourse regarding other anti-sexual discrimination recommendations which had emerged from the review. He also criticized the government's sentiments on LGBT people's involvement in a march that would supposedly celebrate International Women's Days. The statement of the minister can be traced to several events of LGBT prosecution, which later on sparked public outcry. To this day, and to the disappointment of many, Afifi included Malaysian officials still remain adamant in their stance of disagreement and aversion from accepting the LGBT community as well as same-sex marriage. In fact, it is actually fairly obvious that the questioning of Afifi is just one of the many cases where the government was attempting to silence the voices of the minority who wanted nothing more than to be given rights inherent to all human beings. Gender, despite how it is now, being accepted and recognized as no longer being defined by one's sex by birth, but rather how one identifies as, remains as one of the most common criteria of hate crimes everywhere. Another reference to Malaysia and its Shia problem. To say that the Shiaism in Malaysia is in fact a problem and not just a feature of the country's diversity would come to the tragic surprise of any normal person. Although in Malaysia, it would actually seem as if what is considered normal is spreading this message and policy of hate towards yet another oppressed group. This is apparently so primarily because of government legislation, as well as the assertion of those in power to enact and impose to the general public their own hateful ideals. This all began in 1960 during the anti-communist emergency, a government attempt to broadly silence political and religious dissent gave rise to the Internal Security Act known as ISA, which permitted detention without trial for 60 days or longer to those whom the authorities have deemed prejudicial to the security of Malaysia. Years later, the discrimination against Shiaism had gotten only worse, as Shiites had been branded as deviants, to further provide evidence that it is in fact a matter of discrimination and not just purely consecutive coincidental cases. The head of Malaysian Islamic Development Department has been known for comments and description of Shiaism as a cancer that needs to be prevented from spreading in the best possible way before it becomes worse to the point of being a threat to Malaysia's Muslim unity. As flawed as it is to antagonize any one person or group simply on the basis of their beliefs, the fact remains that it is a reality that we are currently facing and have been for quite some time now. It also remains as one of the many ironies of people and of life that those who seem most passionate about beliefs, which were supposedly developed in order to provide a framework for what is morally good and acceptable, will also be the same people who would end up being the most passionate in condemning those who differ from them in terms of faith. Events such as these are the very reason as to why people still fear for their lives, for doing nothing other than existing and living their respective lives as they see fit. And in a way that makes them most happy, it is truly saddening to see the inequality hitting some people harder than most. To see those who have to spend day after day risking their lives just to say true and who they really are. Hate speech, of course, as everyone is aware as well, also extends far beyond expressions and sentiments pertaining to making anything feel inferior for certain characteristics that they possess. For instance, hate speech can also take the form of death threats, such as in the case of some political leaders who act as representatives of minority groups who lack a collective voice of their own, and of forcibly displacing groups from their territories, such as in the case of the Rohingyans. In Gerakan, a few of us challenged one case to not allow an amendment to the Islamic law to be enforced, and Gerakan consisting of multiracial members. A few of us had actually taken up the case to the Federal Court on Constitution, And each one of us received many threats for death. And hate speeches were actually viral, and it was quite a frightening and threatening times for each and every one of the lawyers who were in that group trying to challenge for the nation, not only for a specific group, but we were actually targeted as well. Of course, in my article, I've referred to the Rohingya refugees in Malaysia and as to how representatives have actually spoken, and again, they have been a target of hate speech. I've also touched on, I don't know whether I have enough time, so I'm just like fast forwarding, Marites. Have I still got time?
Yes, you have time.
Okay, so the Rohingya displacement is a crisis that honestly seems like it can be solved given time, of course, if only the affected states as well as the states within the region worked hand in hand in trying to lend out a helping hand. It must also come to mind that in today's settings, despite the importance of a state's national interest and agenda, they must still not turn a blind eye to crises that threaten human security. Political, environmental, military, and economic security are all merely facets of human security, and as such are never more important than the prioritization of human lives. And of course, another factor that comes into play, which plagues Malaysia with such rampant suppression, is in how it is the authorities themselves who are the ones silencing the people through forceful means. Instead of being a champion for the public and listening to their pleas in order to serve them better, the leaders opt to shut out all forms of criticism in order to make sure that no forms of movement are sparked. And of course, I also referred to an article, Roundtable on Hate Speech in Malaysia, where the Asian parliamentarians from human rights hosted a roundtable discussion of freedom of expression, hate speech, and internet regulation in Malaysia in July 2019. While it is one thing to advocate against hate speech and promote the responsible dissemination of information in order to reduce discrimination, particularly based on things that one cannot control, such as ethnicity and gender, it is also completely different and far greater to take leaps towards making these visions a reality. With that, it is truly admirable of the members of the parliament as well as the other government officials who took part in this roundtable in order to properly address this ongoing crisis of hate speech and hate-based crime and discrimination, and though an avenue which makes use of proper political discourse and not one of violence. Of course, then there has been a lot of talk on Malaysia using boats to spread fake news in order to mislead voters. And I think that is rampant in all countries across the globe. In this era of globalization and advanced technology, the internet made communications much easier and also contacting people around the world. However, the spread of fake news is alarming. The disinformation can affect not only the young generation, but also the older people who are not familiar with the present technology. The reason for spreading fake news is to achieve or to get the interest of people behind these issues, such as political, economic, historical, or to destroy the image of a person. And gender bias as in citizenship in Malaysia. I think the article is also enclosed in this presentation. I think I've got a note to say that I've got 1 more minute, I think. Lastly, it's also due to a lot of other issues as well. It's due to the general public not being able to determine which piece of information is verified and which is real and which is not. In other words, misinformation once again is one of the lead causes for the wrong movements to mobilize. It is with this false information that people learn to hate others based on the color of their skin, what or who they believe in, and who they love. To make matters worse, some government officials are actually the ones responsible for releasing this misinformation to create a following which they could then use to push their political agenda. It is still unknown why exactly people, especially public officials, are still so evasive with progressiveness, in a sense that they adamantly reject change and instead choose to hold on to outdated beliefs. It must also be emphasized that discrimination and hate comes from the lack of understanding and acceptance. meaning in order for the general public to be swayed away from the direction of hatred, they must first be educated and taught to understand and accept those who are different from them. And the surest way to do so is by preventing the spread of false information and fake news. Thank you, Marites.
Thank you very much, Jayanthi. Malaysia has a history of diversity, and there has been also racial tension, so it's a fertile ground for hate speech. We have questions from the floor, and the first one is addressed to Senator Pangilinan. Senator Pangilinan, are you there?
Yes, go ahead. Okay.
Let me just read this question from the floor. The question is, Senator, how do you see the role of social media companies in preventing and combating hate speech? How should they take responsibility? And I think Kun Abhisit can also share his thoughts on this.
Well, that's a question that has been in my mind for the longest time. As a liberal Democrat, you don't want to go into censorship. You believe in freedom of speech and of expression, and rightly so. And therefore, regulating free speech precisely is problematic. So it's really a challenge. How do you get social media platforms to self-regulate? Someone once said, I remember in one of the discussions, that Facebook is actually a crime scene, and therefore it should be regulated. And this was in reference to child pornography, for example. There have been instances wherein Facebook pages, private pages, have been actually utilized. One of the major concerns during this pandemic was the increase in domestic violence and as well as internet porn, as well as child pornography. Therefore, that is a challenge. There's also a challenge that lawmaking is tedious. It takes time, and by the time that the law is crafted, technology is new, and therefore, how does lawmaking catch up with developing technologies? 5 years ago, you didn't have any of these phone apps, WhatsApp, TikTok, none of this existed 5-7 years ago. They're here now. So it's really a challenge. How do you get social media platforms to self-regulate? I think short of passing legislation, we can actually, for example, I filed several measures in the Senate, Senate resolutions to investigate precisely child pornography on social media. So you may not be crafting law at that point, although it should be in aid of legislation, but the hearing in itself, or a series of hearings in itself, may push social media platforms to look inward and therefore become more aggressive in policing its ranks. So that's how I'd look at it. How can, as a legislator, how can we use our powers of oversight as well as our powers to investigate to be able to bring in a healthy exchange and debate on how social media platforms should act, should conduct itself. I think that in itself would be a good vehicle and platform to be able to discuss the matter. And so we should be able to pursue that. Of course, I'm in the minority in the Senate, and therefore it's the chairperson of the committee that should look into this. And we should be able to push that. But then again, we'd like to have, precisely as Kun Abhisit mentioned earlier, should bring together as many stakeholders in the dialogue, in the conversation, so that we can, come together, set parameters within which interventions, whether the social media platforms themselves or the stakeholders affected, can provide some parameters for us to move forward in this regard.
Thank you. I think, Kun Abhisit, can you also please answer the question? Because earlier in your talk, you mentioned the role of the platforms.
Sure. My own belief is they have a very crucial role to play. Let me just make a quick couple of points. The first is when you talk about the traditional media, you have what you call editors, right? But with social media, nobody is doing this job. And I think it is the duty and responsibility of the platform to perform this editing role. Now, I know that when I start on something like this, and I am also concerned about the creeping censorship that might come in. But that's why I say that you need guidelines, and some of the issues will be clearer than others, where social media platforms already block, already suspend accounts. The second thing is they really should be making more effort to address this issue of hate speech. I say that because around the world, many of these companies are willing to bend to the will of governments in order to actually do business. It would serve all of us well if they actually put this, maybe even at an international global level, where there has to be some kind of norms or standard or framework set. And so the reason why I would like to go down this path is because I think it's always dangerous to allow governments and states to try to enforce action because that can lead to censorship. And of course, the very biggest problem that we face is when hate speeches are actually initiated by people linked to the state in the first place. So I think they have a very important role to play, and they really should make more effort to do their business in a more responsible way.
If I may just add, I remember an initiative of Unilever, if I'm not mistaken, that decided not to put their ads on Facebook for I think this was a couple of months ago. So pressure from the advertisers. If I'm not mistaken, between Google and Facebook is like 70 or 80% of advertising online. And so the private sector should weigh in on it. And hate speech precisely is one challenge. But precisely for the Philippine setting, it's not limited to hate speech. While hate speech is a serious concern, child pornography is rampant on social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and this this should get these social media platforms to act. Who wants to be associated with such criminal? In fact, criminal syndicates operate these child pornography rings. And yes, going back to hate speech, the challenge of state-sponsored inauthentic behavior, the use of algorithms on social media is also a problematic.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. There's a question for the three panelists. To all three speakers, do each of you see a trend in your countries of hate speech towards young people as more and more young people mobilize for change using social media and cross-border support? We have seen signs of this against young people in Hong Kong and most recently in Belarus. So who would like to take this first? Hate speech versus young people.
My daughter.
Oh yes, go ahead, Senator. Exactly.
My daughter is 19, and she takes to Twitter. One tweet she did in a span of 24 hours was like 70, 80,000 shares, retweets. And so she has, a following, and she is repeatedly trolled. She is repeatedly harassed, bashed. And yes, and I would remind her that there is an orchestrated, well-oiled machinery that is being unleashed on her because she speaks up, because she has a mind of her own. Precisely, who benefits from fear? Who benefits from silence? Who benefits from a public cowering in fear? Those, who have something to hide, and those who have the resources to sow fear. And so, yes, there is a orchestrated, calibrated, organized utilization of social media platforms whose agenda is to instill fear, intimidate, bully whoever wishes to speak up into silence. And yes, and targeted precisely at those influencers who are social media and digitally savvy.
Okay, Kun Abhisit, can you answer that question as well? The hate speech against the youth.
I think the problem we're seeing now, we're also having this problem here in Thailand, is there appears to be a gap, if you like, between the generations. The young people here in Thailand are now engaged in a set of protests, and they have brought up the sensitive issue of the monarchy. And clearly the older generation, the more conservative elements of our society are making very strong reactions to that. So it goes back to the basic point that I made in the first place, that the kind of hatred or hate speech that are being directed at whoever stems from this inability to tolerate differences. And it's unfortunate that for the current environment here in Thailand, also I think in places like Hong Kong and others, there now appears to be a difference between generations, and the inability to understand each other is now leading to this kind of hatred. So again, I would urge that you have to go back to the root of the problem. You have to try to somehow encourage tolerance and the ability to see and live and talk with people who think differently from you in a reasonable manner. And of course, try to address the differences in a more civil and reasonable way.
Thank you, Jayanthi. The question again on hate speech versus youth. What's the experience in Malaysia?
Marites, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I think in Malaysia, I would say that the youth have tried on many occasions to come out to voice, to be totally fearless. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, we have this big, bold red words, which is religion and race. So if you are a Malay youth making this fearless statements, it will still be taken as targeting another different religion or race, and it will end up backfiring on him or her. Basically, he or she is not tolerant, or she or he is insulting another race. All the time the youth are oppressed, they are instilled with fear, they are picked up for questioning, they are intimidated, and I think as a result, most of them just remain silent. So they are silenced. In Malaysia, though there has been many attempts where many people have tried their very best to ensure that they can say what they want, they can actually raise what they want, but they are actually oppressed, they are silenced, they are intimidated, and I think fear for all those things and their family safety gives them this resignation to be silent, sadly. We are very far away from Hong Kong, or even the daughter of Senator Pangilinan.
Okay, Jayanthi, are you're done?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there's a question specific to Thailand, Kun Abhisit. With the ongoing protests led by youth, activists, student leaders, some have resorted to strong language to voice their concerns and their demands. Though this is not hate speech per se, do you share the sentiment that the young generation are pushed to the limit and sometimes strong expression is necessary? It's very current now in Thailand.
Yes, indeed. And again, this is, we're walking a fine line here. On the one hand, I think it's certainly the case that a lot of people have been offended by the kind of language that is being used. And certainly, I think, personally, I think that if they could tone that down a bit, it would help people see the causes that they are fighting for better. At the same time, you know, I mentioned before, I guess the strong language often grabs the attention. And these people up on stage, they can get emotional. I mean, I've been guilty of some of those things as well. And therefore, I think it's something that we need to address in a balanced way. We have also another problem now, which is that whenever there are opinions, different opinions being expressed on social media, there's a mobilization of offensive and rude comments that would come in. Again, it's so difficult to draw the line whether that is constitutes a hate speech. But all I would say is we need to be careful because it's a slippery slope, and the strong language could very easily lead to hatred and violence later. At the same time, I think the reaction to that has to be also polite and mature, and not fighting rudeness with rudeness or strong language with strong language and violence with violence.
Thank you, Kun Abhisit. There's another question, again, Thailand specific. Kun Abhisit, what are your thoughts on the recent developments in the German parliament that Thai politics cannot be conducted from Germany? Has there been any emerging tensions between Germany and Thailand? Maybe you could give us some context on this.
I only read about this today. I think there was a question in Parliament concerning whether government business is being conducted by His Majesty on German soil. And because His Majesty has been in Germany a lot. Unfortunately, we don't have the specifics about the reference to, you know, what kind of business, if you like, or government business you like, is being conducted there. It's hard for me to comment further, except for that, I guess the origin of this question that was put in Parliament stems from the fact that His Majesty is spending a lot of time in Germany, and the parliamentarian in question, I think, was concerned that maybe he was ruling the country from German soil. But the minister, in his answer, said that I think the word was, there was a need to counteract. That could be a translation, I don't know. But it's not clear what he meant by that.
Okay, thank you. I think we have one, there's one final question about whether as Kun Abhisit said, a law is not practical, it's not helpful. And then Jayanthi said that there is this Internal Security Act, which tends to covers free speech. And Senator Pangilinan said as well that regulation seems to be the best, or at least one option, and then the cooperation of platforms. So maybe for final response from each of you, so what is the best way forward? I mean, just to sum it up.
I think we have to recognize that it is creating, it is problematic. Hate speech, inauthentic behavior on social media. So the first step really is to acknowledge and recognize it, and then come together. Let's start a conversation, continue in our case, the conversation as to how can we come together as a community, recognize the ill effects and the impact of hate speech. Especially among children. I have 2 teenagers. Social media platforms can be very toxic and has created, in fact, they are saying since the smartphone was invented, it has affected mental health too. So it's a, digital technology, social media platforms have only been around, what, 10, 15 years? So there's a lot of anarchy or chaos in what's happening, precisely because it's a technology that has just begun to take up a lot of. The pervasiveness is now we're just beginning to realize to a certain degree the extent of the pervasiveness in public life. So we have to start that conversation and move forward as a community. How do we self-regulate? How can stakeholders participate in a process by which we can address the downside of social media platforms, of hate speech, and other challenges that affect the community in an adverse manner. So for me, it starts with the community itself. It starts with stakeholders coming together and acknowledging that we have to. I remember sitting down with the media. I remember sitting down with traditional media, precisely discussing how do we address fake news? How do we respond? And I think we have to, increase the intensity of such discussions to be able to move forward and address the challenges that we're facing. And it begins precisely with, the stakeholders coming together and dialoguing and conversing and agreeing as to how we should be able to move forward. And yes, the social media platform owners should be involved in this effort.
Okay, Kun Abhisit and then Jayanthi, because there's also a specific question for Jayanthi after this.
Sorry, could you repeat the?
Yeah, actually, it's just to sum up. What is the best way forward? Because law is.
Yeah. When I say the law is not the answer, what I specifically meant was it's often impractical, and there's always a danger that if you try to use the law as a main mechanism, you will fall prey to increased censorship. But you can have a law that sets a framework to something that I was trying to suggest, which is to help define the scope of the kind of hate speech, to maybe set up a mechanism that is accepted by all stakeholders to provide the guidelines, and to ask the people who like the social media platforms or the tech companies to help stick to these guidelines. So you can have that kind of law, but the hope that you can use the law to prosecute people who spread hate speech is going to be so difficult. And the Computer Crimes Act here in Thailand is a good example, where that has often been in the end used in a way to censor people rather than actually addressing all the problem of hate speech in an equal manner.
Thank you, Kun Abhisit. For Jayanthi, what are your thoughts on possible solutions regarding hate speech in Malaysia? What needs to happen? Do you have prescriptions, Jayanthi, your party or yourself?
Veritas, I think at the moment, I really think that we need to actually educate, and we must make the young people understand the implication and the need, why we need laws in order to deter. We need this in order for us to move forward. We need the young to know what is the impact and how far it can go. So I am actually strongly for deterrent laws in position, basically to ensure that policies can actually be put into place and practice in the international level as well.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Yeah, that was it. Actually, it dovetailed with my question, but we have time for one final question, which is politicians, and all of you are politicians, you're members of political parties. How do you remain civil if politics becomes heated? I mean, there's tendency as well to use incorrect language, or maybe what is now called hate speech. Maybe you want to go ahead first, Jayanthi. Have you ever experienced being accused of using incorrect language in the heat of politics?
In truth, Marites, definitely no. I've been very, very careful. I ensure that whatever I say, even at any point of time where I am, maybe as an advocate, I always think standing on the feet. So basically, touch wood, I have not been guilty of making such a statement yet, but have been targeted in many occasions. However, in these situations, I also always feel that in the Malaysian context, many politicians or many leaders try always to look the other way. No one wants to actually be there to take it on or run to anyone's defense or make any statements in defense. In fact, they are so worried that those speeches, those statements can actually affect them or implicate them or imply them. So whoever makes it for whatever private reasons or has some stake in it gets away with it all the time in Malaysia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senator Kiko Pangilinan?
Well, I've said this, quite often, that we cannot become the dragon we seek to slay, and therefore we have to be mindful that there are, ways to confront this, without succumbing to it. It's very tempting, to fight fire with fire, so to speak. But I think precisely digital technology it's a two-way street. It's a double-edged sword. If hate speech is magnified precisely 1,000, 1,000,000-fold because of digital technology and social media platforms, then I'd like to think dialogue and conversation would too have the capacity. Safe spaces too should be propagated and popularized using social media and digital technology. This is a safe space. Our discussion in this webinar is a safe space. We are able to exchange intelligently. We're not screaming at each other and insulting one another. And I think that's the way forward too. that those who are interested in creating safe spaces should use digital technology as best we can. I remember one issue, just to illustrate. It took us 5 days to put it together. I sent a text message to interested speakers. It was about the health of President Duterte and the constitutional requirements under the Philippine Constitution about disclosure of his health condition. And in less than a week, we were able to put together a webinar, and the views were like 20,000 views, and instantaneous, enough to fill up a big arena. And you can imagine, that was a safe space. The discussions were intelligent. They were, they were based on law and based on a healthy and critical discussion of the constitutional legal basis of certain provisions of our constitution on the disclosure of his health. So we should be able to replicate this and repeat this over and over so that we can create more safe spaces for like-minded stakeholders and individuals who are concerned about the direction that social media platforms are taking.
Thank you, Senator. Kun Abhisit?
Yeah. Yes, I think I have been accused of using offensive language. And I can imagine that usually when I'm in the opposition, actually, in rallies maybe, and during protests and so on. But certainly I try to make sure that it's not something that I do, I do at all. But I may have slipped a couple of times, perhaps. But I think what's more important is that you show you retain the values of tolerance, which I think I've proved as both government and opposition members of people who have different opinions from you. And certainly when I'm in power, I would take extra care to make sure that I don't incite or make the situation worse or more tense if there are differences in politics.
Thank you so much. And on that final question, we will conclude this panel. Just to raise key points which you all brought up during the discussion, it's very vital that to treat hate speech as a symptom of deeper problems in society in Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia. Inequity, discrimination, racial tension, racial discrimination, also religion and sexual discrimination. And then secondly, that the important role that social media platforms play was emphasized by Senator Pangilinan as well as Kun Abhisit. And the third one, I think, is the emerging hate speech against the youth, which was raised in the open forum. And especially they are the ones who are quite active now in reform, especially in Thailand, which is undergoing a massive protest from the youth. So thank you very much to the Asia Center for inviting CAL to be part of this important conference. Thank you to our speakers for their illuminating contributions. We're thankful that they have given us light rather than heat, something we all need today in this time of hyper-partisanship and polarization, which makes the ground for hate speech fertile. Goodbye, and thank you all for listening.